Welcome into the Train with the Best podcast, a podcast bringing high performance to the people. In fact, the podcast bringing high performance to the people. I'm Craig Hoffman, a media and fitness professional.
And I'm Chris Gorres, master trainer and international presenter.
And today, Chris, we are going to talk about AI's entrance into the fit tech space through motion capture. And we're going to talk about that with someone who is doing it at a very, very high level. Stephen Webster from ASENSEI. Very interesting conversation we just had, Chris.
Yeah, very interesting. Really cool what the technology can do. It's more than just being able to, obviously it turns you into a 3D skeleton and can count reps, but you know, the things that it's able to do in terms of recognizing what is good and what is bad, not just for symmetry, but for things like rowing form. That is pretty cool.
Yeah, it's very, very cool. Hey, look, if it could just count reps, that's all I need it for. Like I so bad at counting reps. Two more.
Yeah.
Every trainer now nodding along. Every client that's had a trainer that is bad at counting reps, nodding along. But yeah, it can do a lot more than that. So we're going to let you hear our conversation with Stephen, and then we will react and talk about some of the thorny ethical conundrums on the back end when it comes to AI. And a lot of these are more general than just fitness, but we'll talk about them specific to this space. But here first is our conversation with the fantastic Stephen Webster. Stephen Webster with us from ASENSEI. And Chris, this is going to be a very cool conversation because you, I think maybe even unknowingly, have actually used or interfaced with Stephen's product before.
I have, and I'm very excited about it. It's one of those things that I think is on the forefront of where we're going in the training industry. And the more data that we could get to people and the more reliable data we could get to people, I mean, it's just going to make coaching better, athletes better, and just be something that makes overall the performance world a lot better.
So, Stephen, welcome to the show. Very much appreciate it. You've created, I'm going to try to use as generic language here and let you fill in the gap, but it is essentially some motion capture technology that then can use some aspects of AI and obviously your fitness background. All comes together. The artificial and the actual human intelligence comes together to help make athletes better. That is the most generic description of what you've done. But how did you get started in like, where did this idea come from to get into the motion capture side of fitness technology?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. Great to be on the show. And Chris, random and serendipitous that we make a connection to a customer. I look forward to getting into that. So listen, I grew up as an athlete turned coach and as a nerd. You know, so there's two kind of parallels. I love it. You know, so I'll do the tech part first. My dad was an electrical engineer. I was the first kid in the town that had a computer. So I kind of grew up around technology. It was pretty inevitable that I was going to study it. When I went to university, I studied at University of Edinburgh, computer science and electronics. I've always worked in tech. I've built and sold tech companies. So I've been in startups, and then I've worked for companies like Adobe and Microsoft. So tech is a strong pillar running through my life. But the other strong pillar is, like many of us, I was just nuts for sport as a kid. Like, I was always, playing sport. But the sports that I was, most obsessed with, I guess, were not even really sports, but pastimes was martial arts, judo, then jiu-jitsu. And when I studied at University of Edinburgh, I wanted to compete in a sport as well as be academic. I wanted to be competitive. And so there were two karate clubs at the university. I was like, which one wins more medals? Okay, I want to be on that team. And so I ended up competing, captaining, and then for over a decade coaching University of Edinburgh Karate Club. So, these two threads have always been there, and I've always felt the problem, as I'm sure you guys have as well, of how do I coach people when I'm not there? Like giving somebody a plan to practice themselves, or especially in a university club, students disappear for the summer and then come back again, but they want to keep. And so I've tried every kind of technology to scratch this itch of, how can I coach somebody when I'm not there? Or how can I, keep up the practice that I've trained with coaches or a seminar instructor? How can I keep practicing? And so long story short, I felt that digital was always the answer, but it needed to be a technology that could watch you. Like, you can't coach somebody you can't see. And so we had to solve this problem of like, how can we give a machine the vision of a coach, the eyes of a coach? So that's the motion capture part. And we do that a couple of different ways, but principally with AI and computer vision. So with a smartphone camera, we can just watch the skeleton of the athlete in the frame of the camera, however many frames per second we need. The harder part is actually not the motion capture. The harder part is like, so what's that skeleton doing? Is it doing a countermeasure jump? Is it doing a barbell press? Is it doing a baseball swing? And once you know what it's doing, how well is it doing it? And against whose performance criteria? I'll bet you guys can argue and have religious debates about how certain movements should be done and coached and what points of performance are more important. So we can't be the arbiter of that. We just have to reflect the fact that coaches have different coaching points of view. And then ultimately, we want to deliver what we call coaching intelligence. We want, whether it's direct to the athlete, it's just a machine to human interaction. But we're also big fans of, and Chris, I'm sure we'll get into this, what we call the super coach. Like, how do we use AI to give the coach insight in real time that is harder for them to see by themselves when they're working a room with one or more athletes? So that's what we do, and that's how I got here.
So this technology has been integrated into many companies and what they do app-wise, et cetera, including a company called Center, which I'm familiar with because their partnership with Hyrox, which is something that I've gotten into over the last year, and we've talked about a bit on the pod. But Chris, where you have interacted with this is the Vertimax app, which you helped build. So I want to I'm going to now shut up and sit back and let you guys talk about what you wanted to accomplish with Vertimax and how the modality of a Vertimax and the technology by ASENSEI come together, because I think that'll be really illustrative in helping folks understand the capabilities here and kind of how this technology can be used. So Chris, go.
Yeah. Well, full disclaimer first, like I didn't develop the app.
No, you worked on it.
I was blessed to be able to give feedback.
Well, you're smart enough to do all the math, and I'm sure you can probably code.
Sure.
You probably could code an app. You could do everything. It's gross. That's not what you did. You just you put your coach hat on and did your Vertimax coaching.
Right. I just don't want people coming to me and be like, hey, it would be great if the app could do this. And I'm like, oh, that's not me. But what I did do and what I try to do with the technology here is I try to connect the dots for people, right? Because there's so much information that's out there. And when we're tracking the skeleton, like, what are we looking at? And for your typical user, if I'm just an athlete or a parent of an athlete and I want my kids to get in there and work out, what's important to me? Why do I need to track it? Why do I need to use this? How does this help me level up, per se, in my workouts? So that was my whole thing with ASENSEI, and I think it does a really good job of, for me, one of the limitations of Vertimax is when you're jumping on a platform and the resistance is a cord, there's no way to measure that. There's no output there. It's not like when we get underneath a Kaiser or when we're on a Vault force plate or something like that where we know what our output was. And now that's kind of given us an ability to measure jumps on a platform under resistance where we're saying, okay, this is some feedback here that is, one, an external motivator. So I know, hey, I'm giving the effort that I need to be giving. And then two, like as I'm tracking those workouts, what's the important information there? Right. So, and it's been cool to work with ASENSEI really for almost a year now. The app just went live maybe about a month ago, but we've been working on this for quite some time.
No, I mean, it was, it's so funny. That project was kind of serendipity for us. So, Leisure Labs were the partner who actually did the app build. And like we knew the team at Vertimax and, we knew Brian. And so they kind of knew of us, but Leisure Labs also knew we were probably the only people that could do what they were being asked to do, which is, can you use the camera to recognize different types of jump and recognize how high someone had jumped? Now, Craig, you mentioned motion capture. So that was our core competency. That was the part that we've done this a lot of times.
Sure.
We've looked at a lot of reps of a lot of different movements. And unlike others that attempt this problem, we attempt this problem. We've taught the machine biomechanics, so essentially think of our motion captures like a series of still frames of the movement. And as coaches, we all kind of look for certain key postures. Like there's probably a setup position, there's a finish position. Take something like a Turkish get up. There's maybe intermediary positions that we want to see you hit. But then we also care about your coordination, your sequencing, your kinematic sequences you move through these. So that's how ASENSEI understands movement. That's how we kind of teach movement. So for us to be able to say, what's the repertoire of different jumps you want us to recognize, easy for any given jump. We talk about nuances. So Chris, you probably know all this stuff now from being in the background, but what's a positive nuance? What's a trait of that movement that we want to coach into the athlete? And what's a negative nuance, a habit generally that we want to kind of coach out of the athlete? So we need someone like Chris on the team that's like, tell us how you want that exercise performed, what are the positive nuances, the negative nuances, and then we, within hours, train, those recognitions. So that's how we recognize the jumps. But the hard part, and thankfully we'd solved this problem just before we were introduced, is when you're tracking a skeleton, that skeleton has no concept of the room it's in. It doesn't know that there's floors and walls and ceilings.
That's right.
You can basically imagine that skeleton as being floating in space with everything relative to its hips. Every other part of the body is expressed relative to where the hips are. So we just introduced kind of crazy work that our engineering team had done, where if we know information about the lens of the camera, we can figure out, so if we know the focal length and the lens shape and the lens characteristics, we can figure out where that skeleton is in the room. We can figure out where the floor is. We can tell, have I moved half a centimeter to the left, to the right, up or down? So now we can measure vertical displacement. So you just throw that all in together and go and download VertiCoach and give it a try. And it's stupid simple. Stand in front of the camera, jump, and we'll tell you how high you jumped. And we'll tell you if you did the jump correctly. But what's going on in there is we're recognizing your start position of the jump. We're recognizing the jump. We're recognizing where the floor is. We're recognizing when you toe off. We're recognizing where your center of mass vertical displacement is. What's the highest point of your body from the floor if you're doing, say, a combine, or what's the lowest point of the body to the floor and all of that. And then we catch when you land on the floor again. And so now we know your flight time. And from all of that, Chris, just to hammer home a point that you made, Vertimax didn't need to add cables and sensors and Bluetooth and batteries to that platform. They just needed to use the camera that the parents and the kids already own. And now we've turned a legacy fitness product into a connected fitness product. And that just super excites me.
So one thing I would add, and maybe I can ask you, and maybe you could give us the answer. One of the things that I was testing was just the camera height, right? So one of the things that I had proposed was coming up with a fixed tripod, where we're going to set up that camera at the exact same height every single time, because that changed things for me when I was testing it out. So when I put the camera at a certain height, or a little bit higher, a little bit lower, I would say that the results were very precise. In terms of from session to session, they were very precise, but it does alter, I guess, the accuracy of the measurement a little bit. How did you guys deal with that challenge on the measurement or the fixed height of the camera?
It doesn't have to be at a fixed height, but what you tend to find is if you're changing the conditions from one test to the next, it's not just the camera height that's changing. And so
the distance, right?
Yeah. So we're quite agnostic to the camera height, but still, if we know it and if we can get you to be consistent with it, you're more likely to see consistency in the results. One of the things we've worked really hard on is how do we make sure that we don't really care whether you're facing forward or you're off to a 45 or you're off to the side. Especially for a general purpose consumer app, when you're not walking into the Warrior Strength Room to a Vicon, motion capture.
Right.
You can trade off a little accuracy for convenience, right? And so these are just the decisions that you want to make. And I think listen, I can't share too many numbers just now, but we've had customers that have tested the accuracy of the jumps, and we're sub-centimeter against
for sure.
We're sub-centimeter, and so I think for that youth population, we're big believers in progression as retention, right? And so showing people that they got relatively better rather than absolute is the more important metric. And I'm not saying that we're not absolutely accurate. But being consistent so that you can see that you put in the work, you improve your technique, and you're improving your vertical. That's the really key use case with the dial-in.
Yeah,
I love
and
that.
well, as in any scientific situation or any formula, like better inputs, better outputs. So that if you're consistent, that makes a lot of sense.
Right.
The tagline of the podcast, if you will, Stephen, is bringing high performance to the people. So let's get to the people part. So you measure the jumps, right? Or Chris, you can talk about this through the Vertimax app as well. You measure the jumps. It captures you at these different positions. Now, what is it telling you, and what impact does that have on the athlete over time?
I'll tell you what's possible, because not everything has been implemented in the Verticoach app, and I got a team working on it, so I'm not quite sure what's in the backlog and what's in the app just yet. But our ultimate goal when we started the company was there would be a voice in your ear of an athlete or a coach you're inspired by, telling you exactly what they would say if they were in the room with you in the moment. So it'd be like, okay, so let's say I want to train with Chris. Like, I don't want to have to travel to his gym to train with Chris. I want his voice in my ear. He's going to coach me into the setup position. So feet shoulder width, a little bit wider, good. Okay, now get down, arms wherever. I'm going to ask you to jump 3, 2, 1. When you do it, okay, that was good. But this time I want you to start your arm swing a little earlier. Boom, there you go. You got an extra centimeter. So that's the experience we're taking all of our customers towards. Is let's put the coach in the room and let's put the coach in your ear. Chris, maybe you can talk a little bit more about Vertimax today. Today, we've very much just focused on let's just get you doing the jumps and then let's show you the numbers on the screen. And there's probably a human in the loop, right? Looking at that with the athlete. So I don't know if you want to add anything there, Chris.
Yeah, I think, well, for now, and I know there's a lot of possibilities and there's a lot of things that I've asked for sure. But for now, even just the ability to get a measurement on that jump, right? Because like I said, if you're jumping with resistance on, how do you know if you're using enough resistance? How do you know if you're using too much resistance, right? How do you know how many reps that you should do? So I think that for now, even that information alone, before we get to the point where you can just coach yourself with your phone, for a coach to be in the room and the phone to give me information that I can't possibly know by myself, right? So I know that, hey, if I want to keep all of my jumps above 50% of my unresisted jump, right? If I know my unresisted jump is 30 inches, I want to make sure that I can jump at least 15 inches here. Otherwise, that's too much resistance. The other one that I look at is if I want to truly train for explosiveness, and this is one of the things that as I've done for the last several years, as I've done these education seminars and certifications, is how many jumps should we be doing? Should we be doing 100 jumps? Should we be doing 1,000? And the answer is no, absolutely not. We know that sports science dictates that we're in a rep range of 3 to maybe 6 reps if we're doing it the correct way. And what I think that this app does now is it gives us a way to measure that maximum effort to say, hey, this was your maximum jump. And if you're giving me maximum jump, but that jump is no longer 90% of your maximum effort, right? So if I know that, hey, your maximum jump with resistance is 15 inches, once you get under 13 and a half inches, hey, the set's over.
Right.
And that's information that I think changes the game for so many people in saying, like, even just like if the phone says a green light, and then a red light to give you a warning that, hey, you're under that 90% threshold. Now we know, like, hey, set's over. I've got 2 minutes rest before I start my next set. That's the kind of valuable information that a kid at home, a parent at home, they're not going to know that stuff. They don't study this stuff. Right. So I think that's
I love that you brought that up. It's very analogous to another conversation I have all the time right now. Another of our customers is Power Block. I'm sure you know Power Block.
Sure.
So with Power Block, we can, very similar to Vertimax, a legendary legacy brand that becomes a connected fitness brand with a camera. And what we've done with Power Block is not only can we recognize what exercise you're doing and track your reps and track your performance of the reps, but we can train the computer vision model to recognize the actual skew, that's a Power Block Pro 50, and recognize the weight that you're carrying. So we've turned the smartphone into a scale. Nice. We know that you're moving 25 pounds or 30 pounds. So, there's people in the fitness industry.
Can I just pause for a second? That's nuts.
That's insane, right?
How? Yeah. I would ask how, but that probably is very technical and maybe even like intellectual property. But like, I just want to pause to point out how ridiculous it is that you have created something that can tell whether I'm holding a 25 or a 30 pound dumbbell in my hand. Steven, there are times I sometimes am not paying enough attention and I don't grab the same weight.
Right.
And your phone is telling me that it could be like, hey, dum-dum, your
phone.
left hand, go heavier.
No, I have to say, I love that you said that, because there was a moment in the company where, like the motion capture stuff, I can get down to the 4-dimensional math, the quaternion, explaining how it works. Now my CTO is like, no, you can't. But yeah, I think
you can fool us. That's all that matters.
The weight detection, that was a moment where like, I now don't understand how my company does what my company does. You guys are geniuses, so I agree.
That's awesome.
But coming back to Power Block as an example, I hear people in the fitness industry act like that's frivolous. Like, oh, you don't need to track your reps. You don't need to track your weight. Nobody cares. I can count my own reps. And that's missing the point. That's thinking like a consumer that can count to 10, not thinking like a coach. Because we know when you're tracking reps, when you're tracking load, when you know your 1 rep max, when you know you're training for hypertrophy or you're training for whatever, we know that like reps and load are the foundation of programming and the foundation of deciding when you progress and when you don't. Add in that with ASENSEI, we can also observe fatigue. Fatigue might be cadence between reps, but we can even get down to we can see the indicators of fatigue. You start to cheat the rep, right? You start to do something to get the rep. So we're seeing all of that stuff. So let's transplant that or translate that onto Vertimax now, right? I love that you made that point, Chris. It's like something as seemingly simple with spatial computing and 3D pose estimation, something seemingly as simple as I can count the reps of the jumps you've done. I can observe the vertical and I can observe your technique and form. Like that unlocks the ability for that person at home or that parent that's coaching their kid that isn't a strength coach to get access to the programming adjustments and the rep recommendations and the resistance recommendations. And, I don't want to sell too many futures here, but when Vertimax are ready, we can look at the colored cords the same way we look at a power block.
Yeah, absolutely.
We can measure what tension you got and what bands you're using. So you're right, Craig. It's kind of wild.
It's really cool. And one of the things that, like I said, I think the biggest mistake that people make. So one of the things that I think makes Vertimax special is, and this is becoming a Vertimax pod now, but one of the things that I think that makes Vertimax special is its ability to train explosiveness, that high end on the force velocity curve, right? But the trick there is like you don't want to do too much, because then you get out of training explosiveness and you start training endurance, and the results might not be exactly what you wanted. With something like the Verticoach and with ASENSEI, now we know exactly where we're supposed to be and what our outputs are supposed to be. And that really changes the game. Like for somebody who can watch and see when somebody's fatiguing, and that's great, that's awesome for a coach. But for a typical athlete who doesn't have a coach there, that's something that's going to really change the game for them, because now we know, hey, we're training for explosiveness, which is the goal that we're all searching for.
Right. And if I can kind of, expand the audience's mind a little, like each of us think our own product lives at the center of the universe, and it kind of does, right? So, let's put Vertimax at the center of the universe for now, but let's kind of see what the rest of the universe looks like. So I'm training on a platform, I'm training with Chris either in person and he's got the data, or fast forward, a quarter or so, or whenever, Vertimax decide to deploy, but maybe it's Chrissy's voice is just in your ear and now you're practicing at home, or, your mom or dad are there coaching with you, but they're, what's Chris telling me to do next kind of a deal. But let's imagine, so Chris, you're looking at my performance and you can see, you would benefit from some shoulder mobility, or your ankle mobility is not letting you tuck enough, or, so now how can ASENSEI help with that? So we can prescribe exercises. Okay. But our value comes in, like we can teach the exercise, because if you think back to that kind of freeze frame biomechanics that I explained, because that's the way ASENSEI understands a movement, we can whole coach a movement, right? So if I was, teaching a Turkish get-up, I wouldn't just demonstrate it once and say, like, do you remember it? I would coach you through get in this position, great, now press through your hips and do it, great, now do this. So ASENSEI can teach unfamiliar movements like that. And then observe you doing those movements, decide, Chris, based on you're hitting all the positive nuances I care about that movement. Now it's time to add challenge. That can be technical challenge, like go from a squat to a pistol squat. That can be more load. That can be more resistance. But we've now got the ability to start from that jump experience, teach you the mobility you might need, teach you the strength training you might need, and move that into your at-home workout. So now Vertimax has kind of moved me onto other equipment. And if your goal is to do this for explosiveness out the start, and I know, you guys work with other technologies in this as well, but like we can detect sprint starts, we can detect sprint finishes, we can detect cone drills and agility drills. You don't even need, and I'm not going to mention any companies that have digital versions of the products, because those are great products and I own them in my garage. But now I can turn a cone into something that knows when it's been touched, and it's just a plastic cone. And so, with Vertimax at the center of the universe, you can see how an athlete can now expand out and have all of this digital coaching. Our goal is to democratize access to world-class coaching. We want to put guys like you,
I love that. I love that.
More Chris everywhere. I've been trying to do that for 9 years with this podcast, and we're getting better. So in that vein, is there then the hope of, or to what extent does it already exist, like a hub for that, right? Because Vertimax is a company and a business decision. I'm not going to speak for Al and friends, but I would guess they would be like, well, we want you to stay in the Vertimax app. We want you using our stuff because that's good for business. And you guys have the ability to integrate all these, your technology is integrated into different products. And it has the ability to work with a cone you buy at Walmart or insert other very generic name brand store here. So how do you then, is there an ASENSEI app that then is going to say, hey, click out and you can go to Vertimax, the integration there. Hey, by the way, come back and now let's get you on some power blocks. What is or maybe you partner with, some yoga company or a mobility, whatever, to be like, hey, your ankle mobility that we saw in Vertimax, now we want to get you on something to improve that. How do you bounce from one to the other?
I love that you're thinking like that. That's the future I live in. And, I think about ASENSEI as an ingredient technology. If I was pitching you for venture capital, I would be using words. You'd
be like screwed. I don't have money, Stephen. I don't. You're barking up the wrong tree. But just in case.
No, but I would be comparing us to brands like Intel or Dolby Audio or NVIDIA. It's like, we want to be the powered by. We want to be the logo on the box. And, when you're looking at two vertical jump platforms or you're looking at two adjustable dumbbells and one's powered by ASENSEI and one isn't, you're like, I want the powered by ASENSEI one. I want the TV with Dolby Atmos, right?
Right.
So that's how we think about it. So the first part answer to your question is, I love that idea. I want to live in that future where as I move from one product to the next next product knows me from the last one. And obviously, in a walled garden, that's easy. And so if that's a walled garden like Vertimax of the Verticoach app, and maybe they're doing something around running, and maybe they're doing something in strength and something in mobility, that could live within the Verticoach app, the Vertimax app. But there is also our partnership with Power Block is really interesting in that we're essentially giving them an SDK that accompanies their dumbbells. So that's not just Power Block thinking about how could we have an app and how could we deliver coaching, but if one of our customers, like a connected fitness mirror or a digital fitness app, is like, we don't have our own weights, can we work with Power Block? Then yes, we can kind of put those ecosystems together. I think the final idea that you've touched on, and this is definitely a future I think about a lot, but I'll be full disclosure, I'm not trying to deliver on it right now. But I love the idea, and I can't remember where I stole this phrase from, but I did steal it from someone, of the athlete passport. That my personal data about my medical record, if you like, about my fitness, my mobility, my strength, my capacity, the kind of coaching cues I appear to respond to. I mean, that's the kind of data that we let you collect, right? Is like Stephen responds better to visual cues or external cues, or Stephen's kinesthetic. Let him do 10 reps and get them wrong, and he'll probably figure it out by number 12, and then you can start cueing him. Like, all of that information about how to coach me to my potential, the idea that becomes something that can move with me as I, introduce myself to other products and other brands, like, that's the future I want to live in.
That's awesome.
Ridiculously cool.
That's awesome. Hey, so I want to ask you a question. So this is beyond now Vertimax, right? So, we're using cameras. We're using cameras to detect what you call the skeleton, right? And I love that, because when we do look at movement and we look at biomechanics, we're looking at the skeleton. What are the shoulders doing in relation to the hips? What are the knees doing in relation to the feet? All those things.
Yeah.
For coaches like myself and a lot of my friends, in addition to watching the skeleton, we're watching the face, because the face tells you how anxious an athlete is about a certain movement. Is there a way for a sensei to take a look at somebody's face and their facial expressions and their body language when they're doing that movement to detect a level of fear, nervousness, anxiety in the movement?
This is where my team watches the podcast. You're like, you told them that? So we have actually done some, I'll join some dots here. We have done some facial recognition, because we're also working where we're deploying in gyms and studios and boutiques where you don't have to go and log into every screen. Like, I'll log in for my warm-up. Now I'll log into the kettlebells. Now I'll log in. So you want to be able to check into the gym or check into the facility, and then when you walk up in front of a screen and you pick up a pair of power blocks, it's like, oh, Stephen, here's your program. I didn't need to touch. Sweaty fingers on screens are not a good connected gym experience, right? So we haven't released this in our SDK to any customers that you know about, but we have some early integration of facial recognition work, so we can kind of solve that kind of problem. What you just described, though, is sentiment analysis. Like, what's my emotion? We haven't done it at ASENSEI. It's probably something that if a customer wanted to implement it, I would probably go look for a partner first that does this. In my past life, my last real job was with Microsoft, and I was working in a really interesting. It was weird. I was inside Microsoft advertising, trying to figure out how we would destroy Microsoft advertising. Like, what was the future of advertising? It was that innovator's dilemma. Like, what does next look like? So we actually lived in a world. That's how I got introduced to Microsoft Connect and speech recognition. And you can tell a lot by somebody's voice, Chris, as well as their face in terms of how they're feeling. And that could be choice of vocabulary. That could be guttural responses as opposed to, so there's a lot about body language as well as spoken language. But at Microsoft, there were people doing kind of facial recognition for understanding how people were responding. Actually, maybe I think I've got my storytelling wrong. This might have been when I was at Adobe, actually. We built, my team built Adobe's call center software that the agents were using. And that was a key data point, actually, is like, could we understand customer sentiment? When you're calling support, are you frustrated? Are you satisfied? Are you resolved? So long story short, Chris, is yes, the state of the art allows for mood recognition and kind of having empathy, giving a machine empathy.
Speaking of empathy, last question here. Since you work with Center and they're now in the High Rocks world, is your technology going to replace judges on wall balls and just start no-repping people if they don't get to 90 degrees?
So I'm not going to talk about Center. I'm going to let Center talk about themselves. Andrew can tell you what their plans are with and without ASENSEI. But let me talk about digital referees in general, because we've got a number of customers where whether it's customers and companies we've met with where sprinting, an obvious one, right? Start gates and stop gates. Now you can do that with a smartphone. Baseball, calling balls and strikes, which is a coin toss if you're a high school athlete. Now if you can look at shoulders and hips and balls and plates and bats, you can call balls and strikes. We saw at the Olympics, we see at the World Cup, increasingly we've gone from goal line technology to we're actually seeing the skeletons, and we're seeing, was that an offside or whatnot? And exactly to your point, reps and no reps. Actually, let me finish by telling you about one of our customers, ReadyFit. So ReadyFit they serve the tactical athlete, the military. You should interview Jamie, the founder of ReadyFit, former U.S. Navy SEAL.
Write that one down.
You should meet with
Thank you.
We have a podcast coming soon with Jamie as well. So former U.S. Navy SEAL, problem that he wanted to solve was obesity is a national security crisis. We cannot get enough fit young Americans into the military. And so he's addressing the problem of how can we train more people who have a propensity to want to serve to meet the standards for the various different military fitness tests. So with ASENSEI powering ReadyFit, you'll be able to, I want to be a U.S. Navy SEAL. what's the fitness test, show me the exercises, train me for those exercises, adjudicate my assessment, and let me submit it to the US Navy SEALs. And then on the receiving end, they're still going to want to look at the video of your submitted fitness assessment, but it'll now come annotated by ASENSEI with like, that was a no rep, the chin didn't come over the bar or whatever. So we're working on that right now. And everybody that sees it is like, why are you not working with CrossFit? Why are you not working with High Rocks when they see ReadyFit? So I'm excited for you to try that out. We'll see if you qualify for the US Navy SEAL.
No, I don't. That's we don't need an app for that. But we could see how close I am to success. Stephen, this was fantastic. I'm so fascinated by what you're doing. It's very, very cool, and excited to definitely use it in the variety of ways that it is probably going to show up in my life, considering some of the companies that you're working with and the way that we flow through this fitness industry. Thanks so much for joining us, and we really appreciate it and look forward to talking to you more down the line.
Awesome. Take care.
Huge thanks again to Stephen Webster from ASENSEI. Just before we get into anything else, Chris, I'm a huge fan of Stephen. What a great guy. Super smart, clearly. You talk to him, and we're going to talk in a second about some of these like ethical conundrums and thorny issues that we get into with AI, and specifically AI in the health space. But like, if Stephen could just be in charge, I trust Stephen. Whatever data Stephen wants, like what a great guy who's really in this for the right reasons and is pushing, I think, the industry forward in a major, major way.
Yeah, I think it's somebody that it's always cool when you find somebody who's just passionate about sports and then, has that nerdiness that he's willing to accept and admit that does
that speak to you, Chris?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, for sure. So to break things down and to be fascinated with the movement, it definitely resonates with me for sure.
Yeah, the way that they are trying to lean into the human experts to program the AI expertise and really democratize elite training, I think is great. And to just be clear, we did not get the chance. We didn't have the time to talk about some of what we're about to talk about with Stephen. I would love to have him back to talk about this because I'm sure he spent a lot of time thinking about it, and he has, I'm sure, a lot of thoughts and I'm sure a ton of insight into some of the ways that the industry is at large in the AI and tech world is thinking about implementation and in its regard to replacing humans, for instance. But also, I'm sure that he's got the information and opinions on it. But we just didn't have time to get into that. I don't think the podcast would be complete unless we thought about this. So to be very, very clear, none of this is a criticism of anything that Stephen in particular and ASENSEI is doing or anybody in the industry is doing. It's just a conversation between me and Chris that follows up and needs to be had on the back end of the conversation of all the good things that ASENSEI and AI can do in the fit tech world. But Chris, the problem, if you will, with AI is that it can be used in many places to replace human beings and the jobs that they do. Now, sometimes that's probably for the good, right? If you're talking about a health space and you can get a better doctor, a better trainer, a better something from a machine, from a technology that is going to be more accurate, more properly diagnose your problem, like I don't particularly care if it's a human or an AI trainer that fixes my sore back or whatever it may be, hypothetically. I just want it to be fixed. But there's also the impact economically on people's jobs. And, ultimately, we're social beings, and the conversations that we have with our clients when we're training them, you can't necessarily, I don't think, at least yet, certainly not with any kind of real human connection, have them with an app. So I think that there's a lot of big thorny issues in regards to AI, and there's a lot of people that are talking about them already. But those are some of the things that I think immediately come to mind with this, and why I appreciate, frankly, Stephen saying like, I hope that a lot of what we do aids trainers because you still then have both, and that democratization of elite fitness knowledge then gets passed on to actual people that are in the profession trying to get better versus replacing them. And I think that at the core makes it like that's the best version of this, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think all AI is going to be like that. I know there are people who don't want to feed the Chat GPT bot, but it's happening. And to be honest, like I've never really thought of AI as something that was going to replace me. I don't know that other people feel that way. I certainly know that there are people that are going to be a little bit skeptical or a little bit afraid that, hey, is this going to take away my role. And, for me, the use of AI is to enhance what I can do and really to be able to serve more people. Right. So like, even with myself, for instance, there's only so many hours in the day that I'm going to be able to make an impact on somebody else's life, right? Like I've got my own things to do. I've got my own things to take care of. There's no way I'm going to be able to watch everybody in the world do a squat, right? And if that's something that they need me for, then we can certainly schedule appointments. But like, for AI to be able to watch somebody squat and watch somebody run or do a 40 start and to be able to give them tips on, hey, this is what is happening. This is what should be happening, this and that, right? Like, at least on the surface level, that's a good thing for somebody for, let's say, a high school kid who doesn't have access to somebody like me in their town or can't afford somebody like me because I'm very sensitive to that fact too. Like I know that there are people who I need to be able to help and sometimes won't be able to at least charge what I would normally charge. And I try to do things to give back to kids who don't normally have that opportunity for them to have some sort of access to an app that can teach them, hey, this is what's happening on my 40 start and this is what I should work on. Yeah, I don't think that that's a bad thing. I don't think that replaces anybody who's.
Well, I guess the argument would be, right, is that there's like whoever the coach that they could go get, right?
Yeah.
Like, the young coach trying to break in who is trying to get the reps, and we've had the benefit of doing that and making, mistakes, and
Sure.
hopefully your mistakes are not that serious and you correct them quickly and you have good mentors and all that kind of stuff. But to grow, and it's like, well, why would I go to some beginner trainer who just got their cert when I can go get AI Chris, and what does that do over the long term to stunt innovation, for instance? It's
Sure.
like, okay, if the AI is programmed based off what we know now, like how do we get to the next thing? And I'm sure that there's also plenty of AI technology that can like say, hey, well, you guys said this, but what about that? Like there's that kind of AI, like this stuff is super advanced in ways that I think are going to be really cool. And, some of this is, you get it to the computing power stuff of,
Sure.
outside of fitness of like genome sequencing and things like that. And it's like, well, hey, I figured out where the cancer is. Now here's your cure. It's like, oh, that would have taken, we couldn't have done that without the technology.
Have done that. Yeah,
there's too many pieces of data, the computing power. So like there's obviously tremendous uses for it.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess that's my big thing is like, how do we make sure that the technology and all that information and the coaching points is something that people are learning to then use themselves versus or like, if it's a situation where you can pay $2.99 for an app that has it and you can't even afford the $50 an hour trainer or the $30 an hour trainer versus the $150 an hour trainer. Like ultimately it is a good thing for the athletes. It's just the societal impact of we are more than ever in our own world, in our phones,
Sure.
and not losing the human connection. I even laugh like on Instagram, right? It's like in their message feature now, it's like write with AI. And I'm like, I'm DMing my friends. I don't need your help right now.
Yeah.
Like, so there's like that's the part that I think, and I know that sounds like kind of like old man yelling at cloud / old man movie character warning about the robots taking over. But there is like the human connection element of it, I think, is a really important part of fitness. We've talked over 270 episodes about how relationships are the most important thing. And that's my big thing with it is how do we make sure as an industry that this technology is enhancing, not taking away from, even if there's really good information on the biomechanics parts of it, that's obviously not even really attainable with the human eye because we can't, as much as we can look at things, like we can't measure with the precision that a machine can.
Right. There are certain things that we are never going to be able to do or be able to super compute. We just can't compete with those processors. And yeah, that's the thing that it can do for us is it can enhance us as coaches. So when you talk about like how does it help or hurt the young coach who maybe doesn't have the experience, I think it helps them. Yeah. Because one, anybody who's ever used AI knows that there still has to be human prompts, right? Like even like the Tesla Proteus or whatever his Optimus, whatever his name was that Elon Musk just kind of put out there. that robot is still being controlled by a human, like to give prompts. You have to give a computer a prompt. As somebody who has spent the last like 2-3 weeks diving into command line interface and Linux and those commands, like I know exactly how a computer works, and computers do exactly what you tell it to do. It doesn't do anything else, right? So even AI is going to be executed only as well as it's prompted, right? So now when you go back to that young novice coach who's just starting out, imagine it, like I think of myself and I think of how lucky I was to be able to have people that I could call and lean on and ask questions. And I can see myself doing the same thing for young coaches now. Hey, can you take a look at this? What do you see? Imagine that young coach now having access to an app that can help confirm what they see or give them a little bit of a perspective, right? Like those are all things that I think is going to help a young coach. Because again, AI is still, it's not perfect. It's only going to work if all the parameters are set perfectly, right? Like if you go into a command line interface, if something is misspelled, if something is capitalized, if something is punctuated the wrong way, that's going to be a user error. There's going to be an error that comes back. So in terms of like an athlete using apps, there's still going to be plenty of errors that a human is going to have to come back and look at and say, oh no, well, even if you wanted to use AI, you're using it wrong here, right? So there's always going to be a place for humans in my mind.
100%.
The one that I worry about is the apps that are going to replace you and I. I mean, there are AI interfaces out there, or whatever you want to call it. There are AI programs out there where you can put in, hey, Craig, what do you want to talk about today? What do you want to reference? What events are coming up that you want to promote? And you put that in, and there will be two people talking that is completely AI generated, and it will sound like a podcast like you and I, right? Like that's the stuff that's like, oh shit, like maybe.
Yeah. No, I mean, there's scary parts of AI in every industry, pretty much. I mean, like there's already, I mean, we know technology has replaced, like, you know, you go to a restaurant, like a fast food or a fast casual place, like often now instead of taking orders, you can just do it on a kiosk. Like there's all kinds of places where machines are seen as more efficient ways to do things. And, you know, again, like, okay, if I can go on a machine and order my food and get the order 100% accurate versus someone else punching it in on the same machine on the other side of the counter, like, okay, like I get why that's appealing. But that's also like a job lost, you know? So there's competing factors on all of it. And that's what, again, like, to be clear, I don't think that this is bad. Like, I think this is great. Yeah. It's just like how it's deployed is the key to making it maximally successful, because to your point, you need to have the right people. Like machine learning is ridiculous. Like my AP computer science from high school brain was like, hey, I'm back here somewhere, as you were starting to talk about some of the commands and things like that. But the programming on machine learning and AI is far advanced than, you know, the if then or whatever version of those statements in Java and Linux and whatever. Yeah. And it can really learn things and it can pick up. It's much closer to how a human brain works than the very linear nature of old school computer programming. But it still is limited by the inputs put in, as Steven talked about, I think, really well. Like his goal is to not just democratize everything on the internet about a squat. It's like, no. I want Chris Gorres to program what it means to squat well. Or like, depending on the situation, like I want some powerlifting expert on our powerlifting app, and it's powered by ASENSEI. Like that's what I really appreciate, is his goal is to take the elite thing in whatever company he's working with, the elite level coaching, and then democratize that. And then hopefully you get a bunch of people who understand that because they're the trainers with the expertise, and then they can spread that to their clients with the help of the technology. And it creates a much better, safer, more effective programming and coaching, you know, atmosphere through that technology. But I do think, like we talked about the facial recognition stuff and kind of the sentience element of it, or the sentient element of it, that human connection and humans being social beings is the part that the AI can never replace. I mean, I guess it can get closer now. Like I'm sure there's like therapy chatbots that actually probably do a decent job. And That's better than no therapy, but it's not better than again the human connection that has been proven by science time and time and time again to be an essential part of our lives. And the loneliness epidemic and all these things that we could spend hours talking about, and plenty of other podcasts do. Those things aren't going to be solved by AI. But if we can use AI and fit tech and all this data, because at the end of the day, like, this is also just another form of data to enhance the things that we're already doing, then that's a phenomenal use. And I feel like that is kind of the way that Steven and his company want to go. I would say the other thing real quick, Chris, that's worth mentioning is, he talked about like the athlete passport, and that becomes really, really thorny in terms of ethical and moral and legal issues as well, because people's private health data is about the most vulnerable and sensitive data that you have. And while the way Steven presents it is fantastic, if everyone has it in an ethical, moral, and doesn't abuse that data away, we know, unfortunately, that's probably not how that goes.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there are barriers there when it comes to somebody's like personal health history. I think Nike tried to do this, but I don't know how many years ago this was now. Nike tried to do it with their Spark rating or Spark score. The NFL Combine does it when they take a look at everybody's combined scores of the 40 and the whatever else, right? So that, like, there's already that stuff that's happening. Whatever's going to happen, or whatever universal thing that takes over that tells everybody, hey, this is your squat index and your deadlift and your power index and your reactive strength index and your symmetry. Like, okay, that is kind of cool to be able to have that. But I think that there would certainly be barriers there where it says, all right, it stops at like, hey, what is your max squat versus what is like your blood pressure medication that you're taking, right?
Right.
So that's those are completely different things.
Well, and also even like something that seems innocent, like, oh yeah, the learning styles thing, that's really cool. But then, like, do companies manipulate that to try to sell you stuff? Like, and that's where, companies will company, business will business. They will try to figure out how to make money off of that. And even your max squat, like, hey, your max squat's going the wrong way. Like, how does it is it used in advertising versus the product itself to teach you? And like, so the moral and ethical and legal, frankly, conundrums are thick and deep. I don't know that, just to be blunt about the current state of the United States Congress, for instance, a bunch of octogenarians are the best people to litigate all this. Perhaps we could use some younger folks who understand what the hell is going on with this
different
technology.
Podcast for that topic, right?
Yeah, but just like this is like, that's real life.
No, for sure.
If we're gonna come up with more and more technology advancing, like, the people putting the guardrails up should probably understand it better than a bunch of people who are in their 70s and 80s. And unfortunately, there's a ridiculously high percent of Congress, and that's not partisan. That's both sides of the aisle.
Yeah, for sure.
That are that old. So there's a lot of stuff that's got to go right for this to be it's maximally effective. There's probably going to be some bumps in the road, but that is the nature of new technology. And I'm excited to see where it goes, though, because the potential for it is great. And getting back to where we started, Chris, it can do a lot of math really well. That's the one thing it does right now, and that means I don't have to do as much math anymore. And that's great. That's great for me. Yeah, it's replacing you, Chris. I used to ask you to do the math. How do you feel now?
I feel great that I don't have to do everybody else's math, right? Like, so that's what I mean. It's like, oh, this does it for me, so I don't have to answer these questions, or I don't have to do this, or I don't have to take however many seconds out of my day to compute whatever formula that I need to compute, right? So, like,
and that's for everyone else. He enjoys doing it for me. That's for all the rest of you listening.
But yeah, like, ultimately, I don't think horses are complaining that, like, they got replaced by cars, right? Like, so the things that we do now, and there will be some change, right? There will be some change in our roles and what we do as trainers. And I'm just going to specifically talk about trainers because AI is such a huge topic, right?
Yeah.
But our role as trainers with the use of AI will change, and we'll get used to it, and we'll adapt. And just like everything else, just like what's happening in the industry and has always happened in the industry, the people who adapt will succeed. The people who don't will ultimately find their way out of the industry, right? So it's like that's not new, right? So, like, the people who are going to find themselves out of the industry anyways may use this as an excuse, but that's not why. Like, you might have been on your way out anyway, right? So, for me, I think that there'll definitely be some change, and there'll definitely be some adaptations to overcome. But if you are willing to learn how to use AI, then it's going to make you a better trainer.
Yeah, no doubt about it. All right, that's our show for today. Be back next week. In the meantime, follow Chris on Instagram at Trainer Gorres. And then I'm at Craig_Hoffman if you like. Although I'm posting much more from my radio show these days, including funny interviews with Jordan Poole about speaking French.
Oui, oui.
Oui, oui.
There's a lot of wee going on in this locker room.
A lot of wee going on up in here. Thanks for listening, everybody, or watching. If you do want to watch the episodes, by the way, we are on YouTube. Just search Train with the Best, and you can find our channel there. It's Chris and I saying the same things we say in your audio feed in boxes, but you can watch us. Chris is beautiful. That's our show. Goodbye.